The empire that feared nothing. The stars stretched far and wide across the dark sky of the galaxy where thousands of systems had already fallen under the rule of one force that had no mercy and no rivals. The alien empire, known across sectors for its unmatched power, had crushed every world in its path, and now its ships moved silently toward a new region that had once been considered unimportant by all intelligent life, but now it held something that caught their interest, a signal weak and clumsy but different. It came from a planet humans had built as a colony on the edge of their known space. This planet was quiet and had never seen war before. Its people worked in peace, growing food and building homes without fear because they believed they were far from any danger and under the protection of their distant home Earth. But they were wrong because the Empire had found them, and the Empire never asked questions, it only conquered. The first alien scout ship arrived above the colony and scanned the surface. It saw farms, it saw buildings, it saw humans moving without weapons or defense, and it sent the report back to the main fleet, a single message saying the target is soft and can be taken without effort within hours. The sky above the colony changed as massive alien warships came out of warp. Their shapes were cold and sharp like daggers. Floating through space, they moved into position without a word and aimed their weapons at the planet below. The humans saw the sky darken and felt fear. Many of them had never seen a real spaceship before, and now dozens hovered above them like gods ready to strike. The colony's leaders sent a call for help across the stars. Their message was desperate, short, and filled with static, but it reached someone, and that someone was not part of a government or a council. It was a crew aboard an old Terran warship drifting in the outer layers of space. Its name was simple and forgotten by history, but its heart still beat with power. The captain of the ship listened to the message in silence, his face calm, his crew silent around him. They knew the protocol. They knew what it meant to receive a distress call from a human colony. No one waited for orders, they just moved into action. Their ship turned and headed straight for the coordinates where the colony was now under siege back on the planet. The aliens began their assault. They fired warning shots at the surface, destroying empty buildings to show their strength. They demanded surrender from a people who had no way to fight back. And as the first human voices answered with confusion and fear, the aliens laughed among themselves. They had faced warriors with fleets and weapons, but here there were only farmers and children. They believed the fight was already over. But then space shifted near the colony, and a single Terran battleship came out of warp, its hull covered in armor dark from old battles. Its engines burned with quiet fire, and it held a presence unlike any ship the aliens had seen before. It moved slowly, but with purpose, and it broadcast no messages. It gave no warnings. It simply appeared and faced the fleet above the planet. Alien commanders were confused. They saw only one ship, and they thought it must be a mistake, maybe a scout, maybe a last attempt to escape. But they were wrong again. The ship did not turn away. It came closer and positioned itself between the fleet and the planet, as if daring them to fire. One alien captain ordered a blast aimed directly at the Terran ship. He expected it to burn or vanish like all other ships before it. But as the energy beam hit the hull, the human ship remained still. Smoke rose from the side, but there was no damage. The shields held firm, and then the Terran ship responded. It opened fire with weapons the aliens had never seen before. Massive slugs of metal tore through space with speed and force, smashing into one of the smaller alien ships and breaking it apart in seconds. Crew inside never had a chance. The rest of the fleet went silent as they watched the remains of their ally float away. Panic started to rise among the alien ranks, but their leaders shouted commands telling them to regroup and destroy the lone enemy. They launched fighters and aimed heavy cannons, but the Terran ship moved like a predator, not a machine. It dodged. It returned fire, and every shot hit with purpose. Each missile, each slug seemed to know where to strike and what to break inside the human ship. The crew worked together without fear, their eyes focused, their hands steady. They had trained for moments like this, and they knew what was at stake. This was not just a colony. This was proof that humans still stood strong no matter how far they were from home. The aliens tried to overwhelm the Terran ship with numbers, but their formation broke under the pressure. The humans were not fighting like others had before. They were fighting to protect, not to conquer, and that made them dangerous because they would not stop until the colony was safe, or they were gone. As the first wave of alien ships fell back in retreat, the commanders began to realize something they had not considered for a long time: fear they had ruled with strength for so long that they forgot what it meant to face an enemy who did not bow, who did not run, who stood alone and still made them bleed. Battle was not over, and the alien fleet still had power left, but now they had a question burning in their minds: who were these humans, and how did they build a ship that could face an empire? The Terran Battleship hovered in space, its guns ready, its crew silent, its captain watching the enemy through the screen ahead, knowing this was just the beginning. The arrival of the Terran warship. The Terran warship stood like a mountain in the sky between the alien fleet and the helpless colony. Its outer shell showed the scars of old battles, its armor was layered thick and solid, and though it looked slow, it carried a silent power that none of the alien ships could understand. The name of the ship was not spoken. It had no bright colors or banners, no signal of pride or threat. It was a shape built for one purpose: to fight and to protect. Alien commanders watched the human ship from their bridges, their faces uncertain, their sensors picking up strange readings. They could not understand why this old and outdated design had resisted their weapons. They could not understand how one vessel alone was standing in the path of a full Empire fleet. They believed it was a trick or a trap, so they waited for a moment, holding their next attack, while they scanned and searched for signs of more human ships hiding nearby. But there were no other ships coming. This was the only one, and still it stayed. The humans inside the ship worked in silence, moving like a single body. Every crew member knew their station, every hand pressed against buttons and levers, every voice sharp and calm. They were not here to scare, they were here to end a threat, and they had no doubt about the danger they faced. The captain stood on the command deck, his eyes locked on the screen in front of him, his hands resting behind his back. His voice gave orders with steady rhythm, each word simple, each word followed without question. His officers trusted him not because he was loud or bold, but because he had seen war and come back alive, and because he had never let his crew fall even once in the engine room. The sound of machines filled the space, loud and constant. Fire sparked in short bursts as engineers moved fast, fixing old parts and pushing the ship past its normal limits. They knew what they had was old, but they also knew that no machine was more dangerous than one built by humans for a last stand. Outside the ship, the aliens sent a wave of smaller fighters to test the defenses. They moved like swarms, fast and sharp, their wings shining with light, their weapons pointed at the weak spots along the Terran ship's hull. But the humans did not move. They did not run or flinch. They let the fighters come close and then opened their own defense grid. Small turrets hidden in the ship's surface came to life and began to track each fighter, not with lasers or heat, but with pattern and instinct. Each human gun fired with deadly aim, and before the alien pilots could blink, their ships were hit and turned to wreckage, spinning into empty space. The rest of the wave pulled back, trying to regroup, but the Terran ship had already seen the rhythm and was ready for the next strike. On the alien flagship, the main commander shouted in frustration. He did not understand why this human ship fought like a beast. He demanded new plans and told his officers to prepare the heavy weapons. They would not allow this resistance to spread. They had crushed many others, and they would crush this one too. They believed it was only a matter of time, but time was something the humans understood better than most, because they had survived through it. They had built their warship not for short fights, but for battles that lasted days or weeks or even longer. They did not rely on fancy tools or smart shields. They relied on hard armor, steady fire, and people who would not quit no matter what came through the void. The aliens sent a broadcast to the human ship offering surrender terms, demanding that the humans leave the area or face full destruction. They spoke with pride, listing the worlds they had taken and the species they had erased. They warned the humans that resistance was pointless, that survival was still possible if they bowed and obeyed. Human captain listened to the message without emotion, his face unchanged as the words echoed in the command room. When the message ended, he looked at his communications officer and gave a single order: send back silence. The officer nodded and cut the link. There would be no talks, no surrender, no fear. The alien fleet moved into full attack position, heavy cannons aimed, charged, and ready. The commanders believed they would finish it in one great strike. They believed the human ship would fall if they hit it all at once with full force. The space between the fleets turned red with energy as the beams moved toward the Terran warship. The hits came strong, and loud explosions rolled across the human ship's surface panels. Broke pieces flew into space. Alarms screamed inside the ship. Crew members fell and stood again. Smoke filled parts of the hallways. But the engines stayed online, the weapons still worked, and the heart of the ship still beat. The captain gave no sign of worry. He walked through the smoke, checking on his people. His eyes calm, his voice steady. Every time he spoke, his crew moved faster and with more focus. They had trained for this. They had been waiting for this kind of moment, when one ship stood for many and one crew carried the hope of more than just themselves. Then came the human answer, a full spread of torpedoes and kinetic shells launched from hidden bays. The projectiles flew through space like thunder, each one locked onto an alien ship, not aiming for shields or armor, but for weak points, power cores, engines, bridge windows. Every target chosen with care, every strike meant to break not just metal, but the enemy's mind. Alien ships began to fall one by one. Their fires lit the black sky, turning space into a graveyard. Their crew sent signals of confusion and panic, calling for backup that did not come, asking for help that did not exist. They were learning too late that this was not a simple war. This was a lesson, and they were not the teachers. As the fight raged on, the human ship moved forward, slow but steady, its weapons never silent, its systems never resting. It carried no flag, no anthem, no cry for attention. It only carried a promise that humans would not run and they would not be broken. Colony below watched in awe. Children looked up at the sky and saw fire, but also hope. Parents held their children close, not in fear, but in wonder, because they knew someone had come, someone had heard them, and answered not with words, but with action. Above them, the Terran warship kept fighting, the battle far from over, but the message already clear. Fire and fury. The battlefield stretched across space like a storm that had no end. Alien ships moved like shadows, fast and angry, trying to trap the human warship from all sides. But the Terran battleship stood in the center like a shield that refused to bend or break. Its armor burned in places, its engines roared louder than before, but it did not stop, not even for a moment. Inside, the alien command ship voices argued over plans. One commander shouted for a retreat, another demanded they bring in more firepower, and others just stared at the screen, watching a single human ship destroy their elite fighters. One after another, they had crushed dozens of civilizations, but now one Terran ship had stalled their entire fleet, and they could not understand how or why. The human captain remained quiet, his eyes reading every movement of the enemy fleet. His fingers moved across the controls, sending signals to his crew without delay. They were low on energy. In some areas, damage had reached the lower decks and repairs were taking time, but the core of the ship was alive and the will of the crew was stronger than ever. Weapons officer tracked a group of enemy bombers trying to circle behind them, her voice calm, her hands steady, as she locked in coordinates without hesitation. She launched 2 torpedoes that tore through the dark sky and hit the enemy group at the perfect angle. 3 alien ships vanished in fire before they could even respond. In the engine room, engineers worked without rest. They carried tools and wires through smoke and heat. Voices called out through headsets, REPOR, TING, pressure loss and circuit failures, but no one slowed down. They knew their work meant survival, and they trusted that every second they bought would be used by the captain to strike harder. Outside, space burned with light as both sides fired without pause. The alien ships circled like wolves, trying to find a weakness, but the human ship fought like a cornered beast, fierce and unshaken. Its guns tracked every movement, and its defenses read the rhythm of the enemy, learning with each pass, adjusting faster than any alien program could follow. The aliens released a new wave of drones, small machines with sharp edges and fast engines. They came in hundreds, a cloud of metal death moving to overwhelm the Terran warship from every angle. But as they approached, the ship's hull opened, revealing a ring of hidden cannons spinning in motion. Each gun turned and fired with perfect timing, creating a wall of fire around the ship that cut through the drones like paper. More alien ships were falling. The leaders watched their screens as red lights blinked across the battlefield, each light a ship destroyed, each one a sign that the Empire had never faced anything like this. They started to understand that the humans did not fight with numbers or size. They fought with purpose and precision, and with hearts that refused to surrender. The Terran ship pushed forward deeper into the enemy formation. With every step it fired another round of heavy slugs and kinetic bursts, each shot breaking through enemy shields, each impact sending enemy crews into panic. The aliens had learned to fear many things in their conquests, but now they feared silence, because the human ship spoke only through action, and that action left no room for doubt. Inside the medical bay, human crew members were being treated for burns and injuries. The medic team moved fast, using basic tools and old methods to patch wounds and send people back into duty. There were no cries, no panic, only quiet strength. Every person aboard the ship knew what they were part of, and none of them were willing to step away from it. The alien commanders gathered again in their war room, their voices lower now, their eyes tired. They had lost a third of their strike fleet, and more ships were showing signs of damage. They spoke of pulling back, waiting for reinforcements, maybe even calling in the Empire's high fleet, but doing so would mean admitting weakness, and they were not ready to speak that truth, not yet. Then one of the alien officers stepped forward with a new plan. They had a weapon kept in reserve, something that had never been used against a single enemy before, a device meant to crush moons and destroy planets. It had been built for rebellion control, not for battle. But now it might be the only answer. They voted quickly, and the order was sent. The weapon would be brought into position back in the Terran warship. Sensors picked up a massive energy signature forming at the edge of the battlefield. The human crew watched as a massive alien ship arrived, larger than anything seen before. Its shape dark and monstrous, its energy levels off the charts. The captain studied the data and gave a simple command: bring all systems to full readiness. This was the final test. Alien superweapon charged its core, glowing with unstable light. It began to power up, a blast meant to wipe the colony and the Terran ship from space in one strike. The aliens believed no force could survive the hit. They believed this would end the fight and restore their pride. But the human ship did not move away. Instead, it turned its front toward the massive weapon and charged forward, engines screaming with fire and metal grinding under pressure. Inside, the ship crew members braced themselves for the worst, knowing they were heading into something that might be death. But none of them turned away. None of them stepped back. The captain gave one last set of orders, splitting energy between shields and weapons. The ship prepared its final strike, a move that had only been tested in simulations, a risky tactic that could save the colony or destroy the ship. But the choice had already been made, because to the crew there was no other path worth taking. The Terran ship moved faster, now closing the gap between itself and the alien monster weapon. Every cannon fired, every missile launched its path straight and unbroken. The alien fleet screamed warnings into the channel, begging their own weapon to fire before it was too late. But it was too late. The human ship had already come within reach, and then the fire lit the sky in a way the galaxy had never seen before. The turning point, the light from the explosion covered the stars, and for a moment there was no sound, no movement, no sign of what remained. The alien fleet watched in silence, unable to speak, unable to understand what they had just seen. The massive weapon they had trusted had vanished in fire and metal, its remains scattered across the void like broken bones, drifting without purpose in the middle of the wreckage. A shadow moved slowly through the smoke and fire. The Terran warship still stood, its hull cracked in places, its engines bleeding light. But it was alive and it was moving forward. The human crew inside held onto the rails, sparks flying around them, systems failing, alarms screaming. But their eyes stayed sharp and their hands did not stop. Because they knew they had survived something that should have ended them, and now there was no turning back. The alien commanders looked at their screens. Their pride shattered, their confidence lost. They saw the damage to their weapon and the strength of the human ship, and they knew this was no longer a simple mission. This was a war, and they were losing it. They had called the Terran ship weak. They had laughed at its old design. They had believed one vessel could never stand against them now. They stood in fear because that one vessel had destroyed their greatest weapon and kept moving like it still had more to give inside. A human ship. The captain stood at the center of the bridge, his uniform torn, his face covered in dust, but his eyes still calm. He gave orders with a voice that never shook. Move power from secondary guns to shield boosters. Check engine core for critical damage. Reroute cooling systems to hold what is left of the reactor. Every officer followed his commands like they were breathing, because they had seen what he was willing to do, and they believed in him more than anything. In the lower levels, crew members worked with tools and wires, patching broken lines, dragging pieces of metal from collapsed corridors. They carried wounded back to med bays without waiting for help. They held walls steady with their backs, while others welded plates into place. Every hand worked for one purpose: to keep the ship moving, to keep it fighting, to keep it alive outside. The alien fleet started to break formation, ships turning away from the Terran Battleship. Some tried to regroup, others simply ran without orders, their leaders shouting at them over comms, trying to restore control. But there was no control left, because the image of that single human warship tearing through their strongest defense had burned into every pilot's memory, and none of them wanted to be the next target. The Terran warship aimed its main guns toward the nearest cluster of enemy ships. Its targeting systems damaged, its scanners half blind. But the crew knew how to fire without tech. They knew how to fight without maps. They had done it before, and they would do it again. The cannons fired loud and slow, sending bursts of fire into the fleeing enemy lines. One alien cruiser took a direct hit and exploded into a chain of light. The others scattered, trying to escape the range of the Terran guns. The alien command ship received a signal from their empire. A voice, cold and distant, ordered them to hold position and finish the mission no matter the cost. It reminded them that they were servants of something greater, that retreat was not an option, that failure would not be forgiven. But the commanders looked around and saw only ruin. They saw ships burning and fighters falling, and a human warship that had taken everything they had and still stood tall. One commander ordered a full retreat. Another refused and tried to charge alone. His ship lasted only seconds before a direct hit split it into pieces, floating across the stars. The rest of the fleet began to back away, not in unison, not with pride, but with fear and confusion. The Terran warship did not follow. It simply held position between the colony and the remains of the enemy on the planet below. The people watched the sky clearing, the flames fading, and a single shape holding the line above them. They had no weapons, they had no fleets, but they knew they had just been saved by something stronger than any army. They sent messages of thanks through every channel they could find, not knowing if the ship could hear them, but hoping someone aboard knew what they had done for them. Inside the Terran ship, the captain stood in front of a cracked window, looking out at the space that was now silent, his crew around him bruised and tired and covered in the dust of battle. No one spoke for a while. They just breathed and let the moment pass through them like a wave. The ship had survived, the colony had survived, and the enemy had run. The captain turned to his crew and gave one order: start repairs, plot course for nearest friendly base, prepare to report full battle log. Every officer nodded without delay, and the crew moved again, not fast, not with fear, but with the strength of people who had just done the impossible across the galaxy. Whispers began to spread of a battle that should have ended in silence, but instead ended with fire, and human victory fleets that had laughed at Earth began to study its tactics. Commanders who had dismissed Terran power began to rewrite their plans. The name of the warship, still unknown, was now carried from system to system, a story passed in secret, by traitors, by soldiers, by those who had seen the battle and lived to tell of it. The alien empire sat in silence for the first time in years. Their high council watched the reports with tight jaws and lowered eyes. They saw the losses, they saw the fear in their fleet, and they saw one name repeated across every channel: Terran Battleship, unknown designation, single vessel, full resistance, total survival. They knew they could not ignore this. They knew the humans were no longer hidden, no longer quiet, no longer safe to underestimate. And in the center of it all, one human ship floated above a world it had protected, damaged but undefeated, carrying with it the strength of a people who had faced death and chosen to fight. The fall of fear. The battlefield had grown cold and quiet. The fire that once lit the dark sky had faded. The wreckage of broken ships drifted slowly across space, as if the galaxy itself had paused to take a breath. The Terran battleship still stood like a giant, wounded, but not defeated, its outer hull scorched, its engines pulsing with weak power, yet inside the ship life remained steady, strong, and alive. Crew worked through damage reports with tired hands and focused eyes, their uniforms torn, their bodies bruised, but their minds clear. They had done something no one thought possible, and yet they did not cheer. They did not celebrate. They knew the fight was not only about one battle. It was about sending a message across the stars, a message that fear would not rule forever, and that silence was no longer the only answering. The command center. The captain stared at the hollow space ahead of the ship, his reflection barely visible in the cracked glass before him. His voice low as he gave instructions to navigation officers: prepare jump calculations, scan for safe ports, mark the location of every fallen enemy vessel. This was not the voice of pride. This was the voice of someone who had seen too many friends fall, and yet had kept going because someone had to. A technician walked over, holding a small device showing incoming messages from nearby systems. Some signals were civilian, others military, some from colonies that had once gone dark under alien rule, now flickering back to life with words of hope and unity, voices asking if it was true, if a single Terran ship had stopped an Empire, voices asking what comes next. Captain looked at the device, then handed it back with a nod, his message clear: we respond, we return, we rebuild. This fight was not about conquest or revenge. It was about survival and strength, and the right to stand without chains, without fear, and without surrender. Back on the colony, the people began to emerge from shelters, stepping into open air, looking toward the sky. They saw no enemy ships, no fire, no thunder, just a shadow of a ship that had stood between them and death, a ship they would never forget, even if they never learned its name. Children pointed toward the stars, mothers and fathers told them what had happened in simple words that would later become legend. They came, they tried, and they failed because we were not alone in distant parts of the galaxy. The story spread faster than any signal ever had. Smugglers spoke of it in hidden bars. Soldiers repeated it in quiet corners of stations. Scientists discussed the readings, trying to understand how one Terran ship had broken through enemy tech. Warlords who once ruled small regions under the Empire's banner now questioned their own loyalty to a power that could be challenged by a single human crew. The alien empire felt the shift, as if the ground under their cities had started to crack. Their high command held meetings in shadowed rooms, their leaders whispering instead of shouting. They saw the collapse of fear in the faces of their own people. They had used that fear to control, to expand, to erase history and replace it with their own. But now that fear had been torn away by a ship that was never meant to survive. One admiral stepped forward during a meeting, his face calm, his voice steady. He asked a question no one wanted to answer. What if the humans are not the only ones who will fight? What if others see what they did and believe they can stand too? Silence filled the room because the truth was already known. They had ruled through fear, not strength, and now fear had begun to die. Terran ships slowly turned away from the battlefield, engines glowing faintly but holding steady as it prepared for the long journey home. Its crew moved with quiet pride, knowing they had given something back to the galaxy, something more powerful than weapons or machines. They had given the gift of resistance, the right to push back against impossible odds, and to believe that impossible was just a word inside the medbay. Wounded crew members shared small smiles and tired words. Some had lost blood, others had lost friends, but none had lost faith in what they had done. A young technician leaned against the wall, eyes closed, hands still stained with grease. Beside him, an engineer whispered, "We made it because we stayed together, and because we never stopped moving forward." A broadcast from the colony came through, simple and short words spoken by an old man who had seen the invasion begin and seen it end. "We lived because someone heard us, someone came, and they never left until the sky was clear." His voice shook near the end, but he spoke with strength because he knew that message would reach others and help him stand too. The Terran captain watched the screen, then turned to his crew. Every one of them locked eyes with him. He said only this: "Prepare to leave. Plot course for Earth. Send report to Central Command and include full details of enemy weapons and ship behavior." His crew responded with firm nods, hands back on controls, ready to move, ready to carry the next mission wherever it led. They did not know if Earth would respond with honors or questions or silence. They did not care what medals came or what news would say. Their work was not for praise. It was for protection, for purpose, and for the right of every human to live without fear under stars that belong to all us. The ship entered hyperspace. The stars stretched and twisted outside the windows, light bending around the hull like waves of memory. They were leaving the battlefield, but the battle would never leave them, and that was something they had all accepted from the moment they joined, from the moment they stepped onto a ship that had no name but carried the voice of every world that still hoped. In the silence that followed, only one thing remained clear across the galaxy, across broken systems and forgotten worlds, across colonies lost and found again. People now believed in something stronger than fear, stronger than control. They believed in the return of Terran strength, not as conquerors, but as defenders, as voices that refused to be silent, and as hearts that would not kneel. And so the legend began. Not with glory, not with flags, not with celebration, but with quiet, with purpose, and with the fire of a ship that refused to fall even when the stars burned around at the end.